been my duty twice within the past week to speak at memorials for historians who have been part of my intellectual life for as long as I have had such a life, who were not just friends of mine, but family, who were close to each other and who died last fall within a week of one another. I'm speaking of Eugene, Genovese, and Hobsbawm. At a memorial last week, a family member spoke of Hobsbawm's frequent lament in recent years, that he spent much of his time attending friends' memorials. I have as yet less to lament in that line than he did, but the two goodbyes, coming so close to each other, bear a weight beyond mere number. In trying to convey something of the weight of Genovese's loss, to me, I chose 4 headings. I'm only going to be able to talk about 3 of them at any length. 1, international. 2, class. 3, responsibility beyond the self. And 4, I couldn't think of a good heading for it, so I call it Sicilian. Let's start with international. It was largely Genovese's work that nudged the history of the American South out of parochial isolation and into the world. But amid the current vogue for the transnational, it is worth registering the stress that Genovese laid on international, even if sometimes, as in his work on slave rebellions, transnational might sometimes shelter beneath that umbrella. International mind, not global, a term that I do not recall Genovese's using. In part, he stressed international because for all the evil that nation-states have trailed through history in their wake, there is as yet no wider basis than the nation-state for democratic politics, or even for a struggle to establish democratic politics. There is no such thing, as Hobsbawm reminded us, as a global government or a global citizen. Slogans, but not realities. The globe is not a political entity at all, but an abstraction as remote as any other astronomical object, which when you think about it, is what the globe is. As an economic abstraction, global is meaningful to the heads of capitalist enterprises. It's part of the algorithm by which they manipulate the economic apparatus, untouched and untouchable by any democratic political process. For ordinary persons, global is an abstraction roughly translatable as beyond our influence or control. But political influence and control, in the broadest sense, is what interested Genovese. That is the other reason why he set slavery in the United States on an international stage. He was not the only or the first to do so at the time. But too often, in that era when he undertook the task, the form in which the effort impinged on American scholarship was apt to be that of comparative slave societies, an approach that presupposes such societies to be an assortment of functionally equivalent and essentially interchangeable parts. Nothing better typifies the genre than that festival of racecraft, as my sister Karen Fields and I call it, known as comparative race relations, a functionalist juxtaposition of slave systems in the Caribbean, Latin America, and the United States. The juxtaposition readily degenerated into a classification of slave societies on the basis of their approach to persons of mixed ancestry, to mulattoes, and miscegenation in the racist argot that is still occasionally heard today in ostensibly polite company, though more commonly these days multiracial and biracial are the camouflage in which such tokens of racism enter the thought and speech of persons who mean well. In making the study of slavery in the United States international in the world the slaveholders made, which I also think was a classic, Genovese substituted a historical method for a functionalist one. He took as his starting point the European states and the states in formation whose projections the New World slave societies became. Dynastic requirements, contests between settlers and metropolitan officials, clashes between slaves and owners, or the stuff from which he fashioned his analysis of the rise and decline of slave societies in that and in his late work. Though he may occasionally have been beguiled into speaking of such figments of racecraft as the black family or black English, he seldom surrendered and never succumbed to the analytical, let alone political universe to which such figments belong. That brings me to my second heading, class. From his earliest work to his last, Genovese started from the premise that the way to understand the character of a society is to analyze relations among the classes of persons who make it up. It is no longer a popular approach as it ever was. Relations between persons and things, crops, soil, insects, or between persons and abstract entities, nature, the world market, have generally been granted precedence. Thus, the confusion that still prevails over Genovese's notion of paternalism, which never implied kindness, benevolence, or family relationship in a fictive sense, and thus the perennial and perennially beside the point debate over whether the slave South may be regarded as capitalist. And for my third heading, responsibility beyond the self, under that heading I might have discussed Genovese's analysis of the slaves and the slaveholders' religion if I had more time. But with little time at my disposal, I will let others address those topics and instead draw attention to a persistent moral preoccupation beneath what many others have seen as a sharp break or rupture in Genovese's thinking. What I see in contrast is a distaste, going back to his Marxist days, for libertarianism, whether of left, right, or center, that posits an individual without responsibility to or for anyone or anything beyond the self. I probably did. By the way, he called me an Episcolopian, so it was equal. But as a Roman Catholic atheist was how I thought of him. Remember his observation that Roman Catholicism would have been a more suitable choice for the planter class of the Old South than the Protestantism to which they mainly fell heir. So if I did call him that to his face, he probably chuckled in wry agreement at that characterization. And that brings me to Sicily, and I don't have time to elaborate it. The items that belong under that heading have to do with the absolute quality of Genovese's sense of family, which for him was not a biological category, it was a moral category. And I could tell lots of stories about the way that became real for people in Genovese's life, and those who were important to the people in his life, such as some of my graduate students, for example. Instead, I think, since I'm probably out of time, I'm just going to offer a toast. I don't have proper wine, so you'll just have to imagine that I have the wine, and I offer a toast that I learned from Gene and Betsy, and I've adopted as my own. Up with us and down with them.